To purchase the digital pattern associated with this video, visit my Etsy shop, Raven Wright Studio. See the link in my YouTube profile. Many years ago, as a young man, I spent 2 years in Argentina. I made a good friend there. Before I left, that friend gave me his military beret from the time he spent serving in the Argentine Army. I always wanted to make a leather pattern similar to that beret. This is that pattern. Juan, this one's for you. In the File Explorer on your computer, open the digital pattern file. It is a PDF file, and any PDF reader will read it. You'll find a title page, followed by a guide page that shows what all the pattern pages cut out and taped together will look like to give you an idea of the shape of each piece. And then there might be a hardware and material list as well. Following that will be the pages of the pattern that will then are designed to be cut out, printed, cut out and taped together. Some of the pieces will be small enough to fit on a single page, and some of them will require that several pages be taped together. Next, go to the File tab on your PDF reader and select Print. It's important that in Print that you set the settings correctly. First, you're probably going to want to set it to black and grayscale instead of color. That will print using only black ink, and that'll save your color ink. Next, on the scale, make sure it's set to none or 100%. We don't want any changes to the scale. None or 100%. And then go ahead and click OK for it to print. I use an Epson inkjet printer. It does a pretty good job. The pages are designed to be able to be printed out on 8.5 by 11 or A4. And if the printer dimensions are selected correctly and no scale is selected, then it should be able to print on either of those size of pages. When it's completed, you want to set it out, and you can see that this is the only page on the beret. There's only one single page for the guide. And on each page, there is a scale in the corner. And on that scale, you can make sure that the page is printed out correctly. It's either 5 millimeters or 2 inches, depending on the ruler you want to use. And then we're going to go ahead and cut along the dotted lines where pages need to be taped together. Use your guide to determine where that is, but it's fairly obvious. Here I am, I'm going ahead and cutting each page where it's going to need to be taped. I like to use a metal ruler and a sharp utility knife on my cutting mat. Once that's done, set aside the knife and start using your tape. I just use regular masking tape that can be purchased at any kind of hardware store or online. And I put it on the back like that. And that allows me to align it up perfectly with the next page. I go ahead and do that for the remaining pages. Once it's all carefully taped together, this pattern looks like this. There's only 4 individual pieces, and one of them is optional. Then, using the sharp utility knife, I'm going to cut each shape out. And I'm not going to cut right on the black line at this time. I'm going to leave some space, white space between the edge of the paper where I'm cutting and the black line of the pattern. We won't cut on the black line until the pattern is taped to the leather. So we need to make sure that it's left there. You can see the white space left between the edge. I go ahead and cut out the remainder of the pattern. I wish I could do this in real life and put my work on fast mode. I could get done a lot faster. But sadly, I can only do it in video. Okay, now it's all cut out. Next step. Get your leather, and in this case, we're using a 3-ounce, very soft leather. That's important for this beret pattern because of the way a beret works. You need it to be quite soft so that when it sits on your head, you can shape it. So we lay out the leather, lay out the pattern on the leather, and once again, using the masking tape. Make sure it's a masking tape that's semi-transparent that you can see through, because there's work to be done after you tape. You need to be able to see where to punch the holes and then cut the lines. Okay, next we're going to cut out the leather, but we're still going to leave a margin so the pattern stays taped to the leather. At this stage, we're still not cutting out the final shape. So the pattern is securely taped. This piece of leather is a 1 to 2 ounce leather, and it's going to be the binding and sweatband that goes on the bottom of the beret. I selected this black because it matches kind of a standard military beret to have a black bottom binding, but you can use any thin, soft leather that you want for the bottom binding sweatband combination. This is the optional flash. I'm going to laser engrave it, and I laser engraved my logo on it. That's optional. You can hand tool something, you can print something, you can use an actual military flash. This is the standard US military flash shape and size. And then I'm going to punch all the holes that were marked when I used the laser engraver. And now I'm going to use my sharp utility knife to cut the shape out. I don't need the paper pattern on this because the laser engraver gave me the exact pattern. And once again, this is optional. You can do anything you want for the beret flash, or not have one at all. Now I'm going to use a couple of different grits of sandpaper, and I'm going to sand the edges of the flash to make it just super smooth and nice. And then I'm going to dye it at some point. I'm not going to show that. That's not really part of this pattern. The next step is to punch the remaining holes. I use a tea candle pulled out of its little metal container, and I pull the wick out. And it's a nice waxy substance it kind of lubricates the pattern when you're going to punch it. And in a curved pattern like this, you have to punch almost every single hole individually because of all the curves. There are multi-hole punchers, but I prefer to use a single hole punch most of the time. It gets a little bit more accurately. My holes are spaced at 6 millimeters for the most part. If you are using a multi-hole puncher, you would want to use a 6 millimeter multi-hole puncher. I've crafted a little catch bag and a holder for my little punch. Those are the black things you see sewn to the punch. Just makes it a little bit easier for me to hold, and it catches the holes that are punched out, and then you can see me periodically, when I take the hole punch away, I'm emptying the pouch. Okay, that's how you punch out the patterns. I'm not going to show the remainder of the pattern. It's all the same. You tape it to the leather, you cut it into the rough shape, and then you punch it. Right now I'm going to use a flat edge tool. This is optional. You could use a knife to do this, but I like to make it very straight and easy punch on these corners. And unfortunately, I left it out of video frame on this one. Let's see if I pull it into frame. If I notice how bad I'm doing. Ah, I did. Okay. So these corners, I'm just using the punch to make a really straight, easy 90-degree cut. That way I don't slip with the knife or anything like that. But once again, you could do it with a knife if you don't have a straight edge punch like this. And you can see that it just punched those little corners. Next, this is when we're going to use our sharp knife or whatever tool you like to cut leather with, and we're going to go ahead and cut right along the black line now. So we're going to put the knife right along the black line, not inside, not outside, right on it as best you can. Of course, it probably won't be perfect necessarily, and you want to clean up. Most importantly, you don't want to slip to the inside of the pattern, because that could ruin that piece of leather and you might have to start over. I've done that many times. But just go ahead and cut right on the black line. And since this is a fairly soft 3-ounce leather, it's pretty easy to do. It's not like cutting a heavy veg tan. I use my straight edge on the straight parts. That way I don't get any kind of curve. And that's how you cut out the pattern pieces. The remaining pattern pieces are cut out, punched and cut out the identical way. I won't show each pattern piece. Now we're ready to sew. So we're going to start by sewing this piece. This is the vertical body to the hat. And first we're going to sew the ends together. And so this particular stitch won't actually be visible. And I'm just using a standard waxed 1mm black thread. I do like Ritzer tiger thread quite a bit. And I'm doing a standard saddle stitch. So we're stitching the center line of the 3 stitch lines that are on this part of the pattern. And we folded it inside out so that the inside is showing right now. I'm going back and forth with each needle in a standard saddle stitch. That clicking sound has nothing to do with the sewing or the pattern. That's my dog's nails on the wood floor in my workshop. So now I'm back stitching. Once you've stitched all the way down the line, I like to back stitch 2 to 3 stitches on a structural component. On some non-structural or structural stitch lines, I might just do a single back stitch, and we'll see that later. But on something like this that's holding the hat together, I like to do 2 to 3. Now I'm using my thread burner to cut and burn the tail of the stitch, the last stitch, and then you press it down and kind of mushroom the head there. And if you do that on both sides of that one stitch hole, then you'll have a mushroomed head of the thread and it won't come loose. See, that particular stitch line is not visible. And there's a stitch line on either side that we're going to stitch down the seam allowance. So I turn it back inside out. And I'm going to use a thick navy blue thread. For me, I want the stitches to be quite visible on this particular hat. You may pick a thread that blends in well, or you may pick one that stands out. I had a particularly heavy navy blue thread in my drawer, and I pulled it out and thought it would look great with this granite colored leather. So you see we're going to stitch down one side of the seam allowance. And some people may call this a French seam, where you stitch down on either side of a central seam that's not visible of the seam allowance. And once again, this is a standard saddle stitch with each needle going back and forth. I found it a little tricky on this particular leather. You don't want to pull it too tight because you can get a little bit of a pucker. So I'm trying to loosen that up a little bit. I pulled it a little too tight. And so that's what you see me doing there. I'm trying to loosen that out a little bit and straighten the stitch. And I'm going to go ahead with the standard saddle stitch all the rest of the way through. And I'm going to do just a single back stitch on this one. It's a non-structural component. There's not going to be stress on it. Use my thread burner to cut and mushroom the stitch tail a little bit. Both sides. And you don't have to use a thread burner. You can use your thread scissors to cut it off and a lighter to melt the thread. I'll show that as an example later here in the video. And so that's what the first stitch line looks like. And we'll do the same thing on the next one. Okay, just finishing that up. This time I'm going to use my thread scissors and a lighter, just to give that as an example. I like my trusty Zippo. You do have to use the propane style fuel. It doesn't work with the liquid fuel. The liquid fuel doesn't burn hot enough. Now I'm going to attach the flash that I made. You can see I dyed it there. Made it a little bit darker. I used a black antique gel and rubbed it across. But if you have a standard US military flash, this is the exact same size, and you should be able to use the holes that I've put in the pattern to allow for a standard patch to be sewn on. Or you can sew anything else you want on. You can not have those holes punched and put anything else you'd like on, or nothing at all. Not all berets require a flash. If, a fashion beret probably wouldn't have a flash at all. This particular navy blue thread that I chose is a little bit bigger than the standard 1mm thread that I usually use. I think it's probably about 1.5. I have to use a little bit larger needles that have a larger eye than I usually like to use. And so I can't cross needles through the holes. I have to go one by one pretty carefully, front to back. But it's this, once again, it's still the same standard saddle stitch technique. And I'm just fixing the thread there so the stitch lies perfectly flat. Now we've power sped through that. I did a single back stitch to finish it. And I'm just using my lighter to burn the tails down. We don't want to leave too much. About 1/8 of an inch is all you really need. And then you apply some heat, either with a lighter or a thread burner. And there's the flash sewn onto the body. Next step, we're going to sew the body and the top together. And you could put both pieces inside out and sew the seam so it's hidden if you wanted to. That would work especially well if you're using a very soft leather like this. But I really wanted the seam line to be visible. So I'm going to do the stitching on the outside. I'm going to use my heavy navy blue thread, and so I want those stitches to be visible. But you could do a hidden seam if you just turned the pieces inside out. And then once you were done, turn it right side out and then it'd be hidden. So this is the same stitch pattern again, saddle stitch, but this time we're going in a circle. When doing a long length of stitching, it's important not to use thread that's too long. That can make it difficult to use the thread. You can get it tied in knots, and it can also wear the wax off and make it difficult to pull through the holes. So normally, I don't like to use any longer than 2 arm lengths. So when I'm measuring it off the spool, I measure it from the shoulder to the end of my arm, and then I do the shoulder to the end of my arm again, and then I'll put a little bit on because I like to lock the needles in on the thread. So 2 arm lengths and a little bit. And so then once you've got it centered, that gives you 1 arm length on each end with each needle. And because this is very soft, pliable leather, it punches up really easily. It can be a little bit hard to see what my fingers are doing in there, but I'm getting through each hole on each piece, back and forth, standard saddle stitch. And you can see I've got 5 or 6 stitches done there. We'll speed ahead to just the last 3 or 4 stitches here. You don't need to see me do it all, but I did it off camera. Okay, doing my last little bit of back stitching. And on this one, I probably did backstitch 2 or 3 stitches. And instead of burning on either side, I tied a little knot, a square knot on the inside so that it's not visible in any way. But I am going to heat the tails of that square knot so that they are fat and bulbous and won't come untied. And then I squish them to make sure they're nice and flat. Now the body and the top are sewn together. And the flash is sewn on. One last step. We're going to add the bottom binding, which also doubles as a sweatband. Okay, we're going to fold this leather right in the middle of these 2 seam lines. Just give it a little bit of a fold to give it some shape before we start sewing. This leather is thin, but it's a little firmer than the body and top of the hat. So it holds its shape a little bit. And then we're going to put the longer side inside the hat, and that will serve as a sweatband. And the short side is on the outside of the hat that binds the edge and helps give the hat a little bit of shape where it'll sit on your head. Seems like always starting the first stitch is the hardest stitch. Got to make sure I get through the 3 layers, the back side of the binding, the body of the hat, and the front side of the binding. And then once it's started, it goes pretty fast. The standard saddle stitch. Go all the way through, stitching it all the way around in the circle, and then stitch the 2 pieces together at the end. And then do 2 or 3 back stitches to lock the thread in place. I'm going to use my thread burner. I really like this tool. It cuts and burns the tails at the same time. Now we have one complete leather beret with an attached flash.